All right, so here we have an Angular controller that wants to retrieve a list of widgets, basically an array of objects from a service which we haven't written yet. Here the controller is asking for that service right here in the parameter, and presumably it would be injected into the controller if it would exist. There's a page, right? This page right here in the config. There's a page right here, the widget list view client, which is this page right here, and has it's using the widget list controller, which is declared right here. This is the widget list controller that it's asking for the service so they can retrieve the data. And I don't believe the service exists. So if we look at if we inspect the page, yeah, we notice that we have an error. Right? Let me put this on the right-hand side. And the error is asking that there is no such, we don't even have the controller declared in the index page, right? It can't even find the controller. The config right here says that this widget list has this controller associated with it, but which we wrote it, it's right here, but it's not finding it. It's probably because we never included it in the index file, right? So let's add it to the index file. We have here all the controllers. So let's actually put a comment here that these are all the controllers. And down below, these are all the services. Okay. So yes, we have the controller, some controllers for the user. We've got a couple for the website. We don't have any for the pages because we skipped over that, right? You're going to be working on that. And we skipped over to the widget controller. So let's load that controller for the widget list, and it's under widget controllers, widget list controller. There it is. So we loaded it. If we refresh, notice that we have another error, right? It's no longer complaining about that controller. It found the controller because we loaded it. Now it's complaining that the controller is asking for this service that doesn't exist. Right? Notice that the controller here is asking for the service doesn't exist, right? And that's happening right here, right? This is where it's asking for it. It says, I can't inject that service because you haven't declared it. We haven't even wrote the code for it. So let's write that. Let's go in the services directory and let's create that service. So we'll go, this is a widget service client. And inside of an IFE, we're going to declare that new service called, I believe, what do we call it? Widget service. So that's the name that we're going to register it. I'm sorry. What's the module? Web App Maker. Thank you, Web App Maker. So this is a container of the entire application, which we declared much earlier. And then we're going to declare a service here. Now, we've been using the factory method to this point, right? We can alternatively use another way of declaring services using a service function here and declare that new service, implement it in a function of the same name. So I wanted to illustrate how you would do it using the service function instead of the factory. Okay, and talk about a little bit about the differences, right? So in the other implementations, we use factory, right? So for instance, when we created the website service, we used factory. Also, when we created the user service, also we used factory. Okay, whereas over here we're going to use service. In the other implementations, the factory declared or registered the service, and then associated the function that implemented that service. In the implementation, if you notice, what we do here is that the function is used to call the function, and then whatever the function returns, that's whoever's using that function, whoever's using this object, it will be bound to whatever this function returns. Okay, it's using a design pattern called the factory pattern, right, which is a very common pattern in software engineering. That basically what it says is that there are certain objects that to instantiate those objects, typically you would use something like new, right? You say new and then a class, a constructor, yes? But instantiating some objects is so complicated, right, that new is doesn't cut it, right? There's many things that would have to happen when you say new, that part of the life cycle of instantiating some objects. You need to first instantiate many other objects and pass it as arguments to the constructor, right? So this object that you're trying to instantiate depends on so many other things that just instantiating this object is a chore. It's very complicated. Perhaps because it needs to read some file system properties, maybe it has to do some network connections, maybe it has to do some database access. Instantiating this object just by using new is not enough, right? A lot of things have to happen. So when instantiating an object or creating instances of an object is so complex, the factory design pattern says instead of giving that chore to whoever wants to use this object, instead encapsulate it, right? Instead encapsulate all this logic of creating these new instances, encapsulate in a function, right? Do all the work you need to do, connect to networks, access databases, whatever you need to do, right? Fairly complex. Put all that in a logic in a function, and then that function returns the actual instance, right? Does the actual new, right? And then it returns whatever the instance might be, right? And this is what the intention of this factory design pattern. And in Angular, they capture this design pattern by inside of this factory function, right? Basically, I'm going to call your function, and you inside of that function do whatever you need to do, right? And at the end, just return an instance of an object, right? And that instance of an object is what I will use whenever I call this service, right? So that's this design pattern, right? The other design pattern, which is fairly similar, is the service design pattern. Okay, the service design pattern uses the intent is to encapsulate an API that is responsible for exporting access to a particular data source. Okay, which is like the life cycle of a data source, creating things or deleting things. And creating a single instance that is available throughout the framework. Okay, now they both kind of almost do the same thing, right? You can achieve the same functionality either using a factory or using a service, right? And so I'll show you how to do it using a service, right? It's slightly different in that the service actually uses this as a constructor, right? Uses it as a constructor. And then the API is tied to the instance of that object that gets instantiated, right? So this is the constructor of the object. It calls new on this constructor, right? And whatever is tied to that object becomes the API, right? So let me show you. So here's a widget service. To add functions to this instance, to the object, what you use is this keyword to tie the API to the instance. So you would say something like, let's see, we need from the controller we need find all widgets, right? So presumably this instance widget service has this function find all widgets. So let's do that. This dot find all widgets is implemented by a function over here. You see that? It's a little bit different, right? The syntax is a little bit different. You don't return an object, right? This is the object, right? The object is right here, this, right? In JavaScript, constructors are just plain old functions, and the methods that are tied to that object instance or the class, right, are declared using the keyword this dot and all the functions that are embedded in that class. That make sense? Yes.
So is this written in a way that whenever you call the widget service, will all the functions be run, or there is an instance
No, you would have to call it, right?
Yeah, when you call it, okay. So
They're declared. They're declared, but you invoke it using the same notation, dot, and then the function name, right? And it will be bound to this function, right? It'll call this function.
unless you call that separately.
I'm sorry. Yes, you have to explicitly call it. Yeah, just like when in Java, right? You declare function. You declare the class, the name of the class, and down inside you create several public functions, right? Public and private functions. So anything that is tied to this, these would be public functions, right? That are available outside of the scope of the instance, right? Any functions that you could declare other functions here, right? Function and something. This is a private function, right? These are functions that can be called from within the instance, but are not accessible outside. Yes, right. These are all private functions. So at the end, right, from the point of view of whoever's using it, the syntax is exactly the same, right? From outside, doesn't matter whether you use the factory or you use the service pattern, you get exactly the same functionality, right? So let's implement it this way, just to show you the difference. So find all widgets takes as argument a page ID. So here's page ID. And for now, what we're going to do is going to declare here a local variable with all the widgets. It's going to be an array of widgets. And for now, typically what this would do is would iterate over all the widgets, right? Looking for all the widgets that belong to this particular page. Yes? But I'm lazy, and instead I'm just going to return all the widgets. I'm going to return all the widgets. So return widgets. Okay? All right, but typically you would filter. You would filter which widgets belong to what page. Make sense? Right? Anyway, all this code is going to go away. Right? In the next assignment, we're going to move all this code to the server. Right? And eventually this will end up in the database. Right? So let's, I believe we had a list of widgets in the assignment. So let's go fetch that list of widgets in assignment number 3. And somewhere here. Okay, why is this not scrolling any further? Page. There they are. I think these are the widgets. Let's grab these widgets. And I'm going to copy them right here. Right? Again, all this code, all this, right, is going to move to the server in the next assignment. Right? This is not where it should live right now. But we don't have web services yet. We don't have RESTful web services just yet. All right? So let's leave it here. We'll mock it here in the client. Okay, everybody follow that? Okay. So we have the server. We just created it. Let's now load it in the index file. Script source services. This is widget service. There it is. Widget service. We loaded it. And if we refresh our page, notice that it no longer complains. No, it found the service. It found the service. Right? And what is it doing with the service? The controller was fetching find all the widgets. So presumably all the widgets are now returned and bound to this widgets variable, which is also bound in the view model. Right? So hopefully what we can do on the template, we can just render it. So let's render it on the template. Let's render it, let's see. Let's render like way up here, right before this Gizmodo. Let's render it, we'll say, I think it's in the model and it's widgets. Right, if we refresh, notice that we do have the widgets, the array of widgets are available in the view. Right, we just need to iterate over this, right? And then instead of having all this hard-coded stuff down below, we're going to have it dynamically, right? So let's iterate over this array. Let's iterate over the array. So let's see. We're going to have div, and we'll send an ng repeat of a widget inside of the model.widgets. Okay, and let's render the actual widget object. Right. So if we go, notice that we have the array down below, but above it we have each one of the objects being rendered in a separate div, right? Okay. All right, let's do that. All right, and down below we have kind of like a template of what these widgets would look like, right? If it's a header widget, then it would look something like this, right? We have above it we have a toolbar, and then the actual widget, right? Again, here we have the same thing. We have a toolbar and then an image, right? So this changes. This is the same for all widgets, right? But depending on the type of the widget, you either have an IMG, or you have an iframe for the YouTube video, or you have a paragraph, or you have a heading 1, 2, 3. Make sense? Right? So for now, let's grab this toolbar. Looks like everybody has this. All the widgets have this. So let's grab that and let's put it right above. So if we re-render this, notice that we have all those toolbars at the top. See that? How many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 toolbars. One for each instance. Right? Very good. How about the heading? How about these headings? We have 1, 2, 3 headings. Right? So what we could do is that if these were headings, we would render H1, H2, H3, H4. Right? If this were an image, we would render an image. So how do we do that? What we like to be able to do is something like what we do in JavaScript or Java, something like a switch, right? Like a switch case statement that we would switch on a particular variable, and depending on the value of that variable, we would use one of the case, right? And they would presumably be mutually exclusive, right? It would match only one of the cases. Make sense? So let's do that. What we could do is have use a directive called NGInclude, right? Like the name suggests, is that you need to give here a variable that we're going to check and see what are we switching on, right? We're checking the value of that variable. So we're going to look at the widget. The variable that we're going to use to switch on is the type of the widget, right? And that variable is this one, widget type. Widget type. See that? So let's grab that widget type, right? And depending on that, we're going to choose one or another template to render. And to do that, we're going to use another directive called NGSwitchWhen, right? So we're going to compare. The value of this variable against many options, right? So if it's, for instance, if it's a header, right? Then we're going to render a header, right? If instead we have an image, we're going to render an image, right? So let's copy this several times. Okay. If instead is HTML, then we're going to do something else. If it's a YouTube, we're going to do something else. I think that's it. That's all we have, right? Those are the only types of widgets, right? So this one, we have one too many. Okay, so what do we render if it's a header? Well, if it's a header, for now, let's try it out. It'll be maybe H1. Let's say they're all H1. And we would want to render the, what? The text, right? Where's the header? Let's see, header. What we want to render is the value of this text. There it is. See that? This one says lorem ipsum or whatever, right? So let's render the actual text, right? Text. Okay. And let's if it's a, let's grab this. If it's an image, let's render just the object. What is it we want to render? Maybe what? The URL. The image. Here's the URL, right? Where's the? I thought we had the URL. There it is. Is it called URL? Yes. So we're going to render maybe the URL. If it's HTML, maybe we want to render the what? What is it? What do we have for HTML? We have text. .text. Okay. And if it's a YouTube widget, what do we want to render? Let's see. YouTube. We want to render the. I think it's a URL as well. So the URL. Okay. All right. So let's re-render this. Notice that all the widgets, all the heading widgets, are rendering of headers. You see that? Gizmodo, Lorem Ipsum, they're all the same size, right? So we need to do a little more work there. For the images, notice that indeed we are rendering the URL. There it is, lorempixel.com. That is the URL for the image. For the HTML, notice that it's rendering the literal HTML text, right? That's a problem. We don't want the HTML code. We actually want to render the as interpreted by the browser, right? As an actual paragraph, not the escape characters, right? And notice that for the YouTube widget, notice that we have the URL, right? So we're getting closer. So there it is. So we use NGSwitch and we use NGSwitch when together to be able to decide which piece of template we want. Everybody good? All right, awesome. So let's keep working on this on the heading over here. What we want to be able to do here is depending on the size, right? Because the widget text. Actually, let's put here the size, right? Size. Notice we have the size here, 2, 4, 4, right? Depending on that size, we would like to render either H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, whatever the size of the actual heading is, right? So what we could do is here, right? We could use another ng switch, right? Depending on the size of the heading, we would choose to render either H1 or H2 or H3, right? So we could do ng switch on the widget size, okay? And then down below, we could say, if the when is equal to 1, then I want this H1, or right, if it's 2, then it's H2. It's H2. If the size is 3, then I want to render this H3. If it's a 4, then I want to render this 4. Right? If it's 5, then I want to render this 5. Right? And finally, if it's 6, I want to render H6. Yes? Make sense? Yes. You mean like this? Something like this? Unfortunately, no. If this were server side, like in JSPs or ASPs, or this would work because this would be rendered. This would be generated. The HTML would be generated long before the browser sees this. Okay, and so what the HTML that gets generated already has H1, H2, H3 by the time it gets to the client. By the time the browser sees this, right? This is the opposite, right? The browser sees this first, right? It tries to parse this and says, H what? I have no idea what that tag is, right? And you're going to get a lot of errors. Eventually, the Angular parses the page long after the browser has looked at this and parsed it, and says, "Oh, okay, you want this to be H," and then replace that with. But by that time, the browser already has complained and says, "I have no idea what is this." All right. So no, on the client side, you can't do that, unfortunately. Right. So H1. So if we re-render this, we do have Gizmodo 2 and Lorem Ipsum 4. Notice that we do have the templates haven't been rendered. Right. So let's look at what it actually gets generated in the DOM. Right. Notice that indeed only the H2 has been rendered. Okay. Where the other ones they haven't even been added to the DOM. Right. There's only comments saying that these would have been rendered, right? If the value would have been 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever other value, right? But they have been removed from the DOM entirely, even though they live in the actual ASCII code, right? Right. The Angular removes it from the DOM. All right. Everybody okay? All right. Let's keep going. What about the image over here? So in this image, what we could do is use this URL as a source attribute for the image, right? We could do something like img, and then the source is the image widget URL right here. See that? right? And we also have a size, I believe, don't we? We have a size somewhere if it's an image, width, right there, width, right? So we could do that the width of this image, right, is equal to widget dot size, right? And there we go. So if we render it, it doesn't quite work. What happened here? Inspect, lorem ipsum source width. What happened to the width? Don't we have a width? Did I spell it wrong? Oh, width, not size. Sorry, width. Still, HTTP is that not a correct URL? Access denied. What? New wave. I'm correctly logged in. Why would that not be? That's weird. Okay. But it's rendering here. Am I not? This is rendering. Why would this render and not the other? Interesting. Inspect. Oh, this is an actual image. All right. I'm going to use an actual image. And let's go back to the service. And I'm going to replace this lorem with an image, an actual image. And here I'm going to use it. Okay, that's the only image we have, right? Let's refresh. And there it is. Okay, it loads the image. It loads the image. Make sense? Everybody good? But notice we got an error message. See that? If you look at the console, it says, "Hey, I tried to fetch this something, whatever that is, right? Widget URL." See that? What happens is that the same thing, right? The browser parses this image tag before Angular gets to it, right? The browser parses this HTML, and its behavior is the browser, when it sees a URL like this, default behavior is that it starts downloading the image right away. It says, "Ooh, I have to go off and start downloading the. If you have 10 images on the page, I need to start downloading them in parallel, right? And downloading so that I can render the page." So when it gets here, it sees these open bracket, something or other. It says, "Oh, that's a really weird URL," right? And it complains. The browser complains, giving out an exception, saying, "I wasn't able to fetch that image," right? Even though the image is being rendered, actually, if we inspect it, the source, it's fine. See that? There's nothing wrong with the URL. But that's because Angular eventually gets a hold of this image tag, and it replaces the source it evaluates the widget.URL, and it replaces the source with an actual value. But that's long after the browser complains, right? Long after the browser. So the browser basically tries to fetch it again later when JavaScript renders that URL. So we always want to try and remove any error messages from the console. We don't want any error messages. So there's an alternative to using SRC, which is NGInclude, right? This directive, what it does is that it tells the browser, it says, browser, there is no source, so don't complain about this, right? You don't have it yet, so you don't even know where this is coming from, so don't complain. So meaning, hey browser, I'll get to this later, right? Once you had a chance to parse the entire page, don't download anything, all right? I'll let you know later. And indeed, when we render, we get the same exact functionality. The image is downloaded a little later, right? After the page gets parsed, after Angular gets a hold of it, and notice that there's no error message. Okay. All right. How about this YouTube? Let's work on this YouTube. So the YouTube down here, it's using an iframe. See that? And that iframe is using this URL to render that video, right? And the URL right now that we have is what does the URL look like? Let's see. The URL looks like this. See that? HTTPS, YouTube, yada yada yada. See that? Right? This is the URL. But notice that this URL is slightly different. This URL is slightly different than what we are using to render it here in hard-coded. See that? This one is https www.youtube.com embed something something or other. See that? Whereas the URL that we have, it's a little slightly different. youtube.be yada. So if we look at the URL, if we paste it here, we'll see that it goes out to hello. Yeah. Right. It goes out to this video. So it's the page where the video is hosted, right? Not the actual image, not the actual video, right? So they're slightly different. Yeah, this is the boat I want. So this is the URL to the page, whereas this is the URL that is used for embedding it inside of a page. This is the one we want, right? Not this. The syntax is slightly different. The syntax over here is that it starts with https youtube.com embed and then the ID of the video, right? Whereas this starts with youtube.be and then the ID of the video. All right, so what we need to do is generate this iframe, but this URL is dynamic, right? This URL is dynamic instead. So we need to generate this URL. Okay, so let's grab this iframe and let's paste it as what we want for YouTube URL. Where is it? Let's see. There it is, right? We have this ng switch. If it's YouTube, we want this iframe, right? But this source needs to be dynamic, not hard-coded, right? Presumably it's coming from some database, okay? So to retrieve this, we are going to, it's not enough to say this, right? Widget dot URL. It's not enough to do that because the URL is in the wrong format, right? It needs to be youtube.com/embed/ the ID, and what we have is youtube.be/ID. Yes? So it's not enough to do that. We need to go out maybe to the controller model. Get YouTube URL, okay, or embed URL, and we're going to pass the actual what we have. We have the widget URL. I'm going to pass you the URL I have, but I need you to return it to me in the correct format. Make sense? Right? We need this format. Right? We need this. Where is it? We need this format. Okay. Okay. So let's calculate this URL. Let's create this function on the controller. So let's go out to the controller. Let's see controller, and declare that function. We'll say that is VM dot that function implemented a little later. Down here, we'll say function, and then it receives the widget URL. Okay, and what we're going to do is going to calculate the YouTube URL. Yes. So let's see. What we have is what we have. Let's do a console log widget URL. Is that video still playing? No, let me stop that. Okay, so what we have is, let's see. There it is. We have YouTube, BE, yada yada, whatever that is, right? We need to grab this ID. We need to grab this ID and build the URL. Okay, so let's do that. So what we could do is split this URL on the slash. See that? That's going to give us an array of strings, of which the last string in that array is the ID. Yes? All right, so let's do that. So let's split that URL on the slash, and we're going to get the widget, we're going to say URL parts, the various parts of the URL, and let's do a console log URL parts. Okay, so if we refresh, notice that that's what we get. We get an array of which the last one is the ID. See that? I'm going to grab that ID. So it's the last element. So the ID of the movie is URL parts. The last part, so it's going to be URL parts dot length -1. So the last element, right? So now we can do a console log the ID. So let's see. Okay, there is the ID. We got the ID, right? So now we can build the URL, and the URL should look like. Let's see. What does it look like? We have it here, down here. It looks like this: HTTPS YouTube embed followed by the ID. See that? Right. So let's go back and build the URL. So the URL is this string followed by the ID. Yes? All right. Great, we got the URL. We can just return it now. Return the URL. Return the URL. So if we refresh, oh my goodness, we had it. We have something even worse. It says can't interpolate get YouTube yada yada widget.url. It's blocked. The URL is not allowed by SCE delegate policy. All right. So what's happening here is that Angular deems dynamic URLs that are used for iframes. It deems, and by default, it deems them unsecure. Okay. Notice that it did not do it for the images. Right. For the images, it's fine. It just used the dynamic URL and it used it to render the image. There was no problem there. The reason is that images are a little slightly different. Right. Images are static. Right. It's just it's that. JPEG or PNG, and that's it, right? There's no embedded code or anything that can run. Unlike iframes, you are actually embedding somebody else's website, right? It's an entire website that can contain all sorts of things in there. Right? JavaScript, it can contain applets, you can contain .NET plugins, right? And so those are by default deemed unsecure, right? So what Angular says is that, okay, if you do really want to embed something like that dynamically, you have to tell me that you trust that source. Right? You have to explicitly tell me that this is indeed what you want to do. By default, I'm going to say it's insecure unless you explicitly overrule me. Yes? So let's see how we can overrule the policy. All right? So let's do that. So to do that, we're going to need the SCE. The SCE. Let's load the documentation for that. Angular SCE. It's a strict contextual escaping, meaning it's a service, right, that allows you to vote whether you trust this source. Right? Do you trust this URL? Is it okay? Right, because you're using it as an iframe. Is it okay? How about this JavaScript that you're dynamically loading? I mean, you can trust the JavaScript that you write, but what about JavaScript that somebody else writes, right? And you're dynamically loading it. Is that okay? Right? How about this HTML? You can trust the HTML that you write, obviously, but what about HTML that somebody copies and pastes, right, and puts it in the database, right? And you're dynamically loading this HTML and you're going to render it in your page. It's not your HTML, it's somebody else's HTML. Are you going to trust that? Right, so the SCE allows you to interpret this and vote whether you trust something or not. Okay, and you will see here quite a few functions that allow you to vote whether you trust something. Right, so for instance, there's functions that allows you to trust, right, to vote whether you trust as HTML. Do you trust the HTML that you're downloading? Do you trust the URL that you're trying to use for an iframe? You know, what do you trust these things? How about the JavaScript that you downloaded? Is it okay to just download JavaScript and run it? Right? Do you trust these things? Right? So because all these are by default deemed insecure. Right? Make sense? All right. So to do that, the controller is going to ask for the SCE, just like any other service, and we're going to explicitly deem this URL secure. Right, we're going to say, instead of return the URL, we're going to say $SCE trust as URL. And we're going to return a trust. And say, we do trust this URL. Right, it's okay, use it. Right, so if we refresh, it's still not, wait a minute, did I use the right one? There's a few of them here. Parse Trust as HTML, trust as URL. Oh, maybe it's this one, I'm sorry. Trust as resource URL. Let's see. Okay, there it is. Now it loaded the URL, right? And it's no longer complaining about that loading of that URL. Make sense? Everybody okay? And same thing with this HTML. See what's it doing with the HTML? It's escaping the HTML, right? If you see the HTML, we have here in the URL, the HTML that we have for the HTML right here, the HTML widget, we have raw HTML. It's not escaped. See that? We have actual pointy brackets in there. They're not escaped. But when we try to render it, notice that it's escaping it. Right? That's the default behavior. It says, you don't literally mean for me to render this as HTML, right? So by default, it says I'm not gonna trust any HTML, dynamic HTML anyway, right? Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to escape everything, right? So all pointy brackets, I'm going to change them to escape characters, right? So that I render it as the text, as if it were ASCII code, right? So what we want to, we need to deem this HTML as safe, right? And say, no, don't escape it. I literally want you to render the HTML. I want you to interpret, I want the browser to interpret this as if it were actual HTML and render the paragraph, right? Render the actual paragraph in there, all right? So to do that, we need to do something similar, right? We need to, from the client, where is the HTML? So here's the HTML. Wait a minute, where are you? Or that's heading, that's URL, that's HTML. This HTML, what we want to do here, we want to basically inside of this div, we want to have this text, injected into here, right? Injected into this div. If it's a paragraph or if there are hyperlinks and styles and whatever the HTML is, we want it to be injected into this div. We want this div value, right, to have the value, just like we have an input field, and it's bound to some JSON object that we're reading from the database or reading from the server, right? And we use NGModel. Yes? Remember, NGModel, what it does is it binds a form element, right? An input field, a text area, whatever, right? It binds it to some data in the controller, right? Some JSON object. We want to bind this text. We want to bind it and inject it into this div. I want to render this text in this div, right? So to do that, we can use ng bind. So bind allows you to bind any value, any non-HTML value. But in this particular case, we want to bind actual HTML. The actual value that what you want to render inside of this div actually contains HTML code, right? So we're going to say bind HTML, and the value is this widget text, right? If we try to render that, it's going to complain. Yes, I tried to render the HTML, right? But you have not voted whether you trust this HTML or not, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to do this. We're going to do something like we're going to do something similar to what we did for the iframe over here, right? We're going to vote this HTML as safe. It says we trust this HTML, right? I copied it and pasted it in there, right? So trust it is okay. Yes. So let's do that. Instead of just rendering the text, I'm going to go back to the server, to the client, and I'm going to say, go to the model and get a trusted HTML. I'm going to pass the HTML. It's in the text, all right? And in the controller, I'm going to implement this function. Right? In this function, I'll implement it right here. I'm going to say vm.get trusted HTML, implement it in a function down below, and it's right here. and we're going to receive the actual HTML. And we're going to vote it. We're going to say, yes, we trust this HTML. It's okay. I'm going to override your security concerns. And I'm going to say that we do trust it. I'm going to say $SCE, trust as, is it HTML? I think it's HTML. HTML, and we're going to return trust as HTML. I think that's the code. Is it trust as HTML? Yes, trust as HTML. Right. So if we re-render that, indeed now notice that it rendered as actual HTML. See that? It's being interpreted as a paragraph. Just to try it out, let me put some more interesting HTML in there. That's pretty lame. It's just a paragraph. Let's go to my favorite blog, Gizmodo, and let me copy a snippet of HTML. Let's see. Let's go into this. And let's copy this right here. Let's copy that HTML, and we're gonna paste it in the service. So instead of lorem ipsum, I'm gonna paste the HTML in there. Actually, I think, is it pasting the HTML? Let me see. Is there actual HTML in there? No, it's just text. Is it? Just copy the text. I actually want HTML, right? So let's go fetch some real HTML. So what we could do is I can inspect this, inspect it. There it is. Let me see. Is that it? Okay, so that's that piece. I'm going to copy the HTML, copy outer HTML, and I'm going to paste that in here. Let me see if it's indeed HTML. Okay, it is a HTML. Right? It's got a paragraph. It's got a hyperlink. There's a hyperlink in there, right? So it's actual HTML. The only problem is that I got double quotes in there. See that double quotes? And so what I have here in my code is that I have double quotes instead of double quotes, right? So I'm going to replace the outer double quotes. I'm going to replace them with single quotes, right? So they don't compete with the inner quotes, right? So I'm going to replace here and put here single quotes. Okay, I think that's good. So if I go back and refresh my page, there it is. That's the URL. That's the HTML that I copied from Gizmodo, right? Notice that it includes the hyperlinks and everything, right? If I click on the hyperlink, it navigates to, even the hyperlinks work. Everything works. Very good, right? Obviously, that could be malicious HTML, right? That HTML could have JavaScript embedded in there, right? And that's why it doesn't trust it by default, right? It forces us to override it if we really, really, really trust it, okay? And we might have a process by which when folks, are using this when they're creating this widget, right? Whenever they're copying just unrestricted HTML and copying and pasting it inside of our code, we would have go through a process of vetting, right? That we would scrub any malicious code, right? We would just scrub it out, right? Making sure that there is no embedded JavaScript, there's no embedded links, right, to other styling that could break, right? What if this has links to jQuery or its own Angular, right? And now we would have Angular embedded inside of Angular, right? And we have this a collision between JavaScript, a collision between style sheets. All right. All right. Everybody good? Make sense? All right. All right. All right. So let's go back to the HTML here. Now these widgets, right now we only have just a few widgets, yes? And those widgets, right now, they are being implemented right here inside of the list view client, yes? Now this could get out of hand, no? Because right now it's not a problem. We only have 4 widgets, but you could imagine that there could be a few dozen widgets, right? And having the template and all the logic in here, could start getting out of hand, right? This widget list view, could grow fairly complex, right? So an alternative to deal with this complexity is that we could perhaps implement the actual logic for this, right? We could implement it in a separate document, in a separate HTML document, right? And load that document separately, right? What we could do, for instance, right, is that each widget could live in its own little HTML, right? So, for instance, what we could do is that we could have inside of the widget templates, we could have another HTML here that says something like widget dash HTML or header, okay, dot client view dot client dot HTML, right? And in that HTML, this would be a snippet. We could have this logic, right? We could have this logic over here live here, right? That says ng switch on the widget size, and depending on that size, then render the text. Okay, and so now instead of having this in here, right, we could load, right? We could side load that content, right, into here, right? So we could do something like we have the header, right, and instead of having this in here, right, we could use NGInclude. And let's look at NGInclude right here. We can say NGInclude. So NGInclude allows you to load a particular HTML document, right? And it has arguments such as src, right? That allows you to say where is that page located, right? Where is that HTML piece of code located? And it's a string. Now this string, one of the more powerful features here is that this string could be a variable. This string could be a variable, right? So I could calculate this dynamically, right? As opposed to being a hard-coded string, right? So let's first look at treating it as a hard-coded string, right? So we could say NGInclude. We could say NGInclude and say that src is this other HTML document right here, widget dash header view client yada 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 yada, right? So we'll say widget dash header dot view dot client dot HTML. Okay, so if we try to render this, it didn't work. Wait a minute. Maybe I need. Oh, okay. All right. So it's treating as a variable, right? It's saying, oh, this is a variable. It's a very weird variable name, right? But it's trying to evaluate this variable. Instead, I want you to treat this as a literal string, right? So I'm going to put quotes around it, right? It says, no, this is not a variable. Don't try to evaluate this, right? Instead, take this as a literal string. Okay. Now it says that, okay, fine. I tried to load your literal string, but I can't find it. Where is it? According to you, right, this is somewhere, a document that is located under the assignment directory. See that? Right? It's measuring the location of this file off of this directory right here. See that? We actually need to be a little more specific in that it's under views, under widget, right? We need to put it where is it? It's inside of views, inside of widget, and that's where you will find it. Maybe not. Did I misspell something? Views. Oh, template. Thank you. Templates. templates. Yeah, let's refresh. There it is, right? I got back my my headings again, right? But notice the interesting part, right? That this widget variable is declared at this scope, right? At the ng repeat scope inside of this div. See that? Everybody inside of this div has access to this local variable widget. See that? Even the NGInclude, right? Even the NGInclude. Because if you look at the NGInclude, notice that it's referencing this variable that is nowhere declared here. See that? Right? It references this variable was declared outside of the HTML. It was declared way out here. It's being included, but it still has an inner scope, and the inner scope inherits from the outer scope. Okay, make sense? All right. Let's go a little further. How about this this image? Same thing, right? The image. We could create an image, right? We could say another one here. We could say a new HTML, and it would be widget dash image dot view dot client dot HTML, right? And in here, we could copy this, right? Copy it and put it in here. Now, obviously, these are very trivial widgets, right? It's just one-liners, right? Or maybe just a few lines. But you could consider that these could be fairly complex widgets. For instance, these could be line items. They could be iterators. They could be repeaters. Could be data tables, right? That are reading from a database, right, and iterating over several records. So it could be these could be fairly complex widgets, right? So it's better to separate these, right, and put them in their own HTML, and then include them and just put them anywhere you want. An alternative to doing this is using directives, which we'll see next week. Yes.
Why doesn't the browser complain when you type web equal to this Angular code?
I'm sorry, where? Oh, because so SRC is what's used to get. So what happens is that the parser, the browser reads this, right? And when it finds SRC, the behavior is to start downloading right away, right? Because again, to speed up, for instance, JavaScript gets downloaded right away. Images get downloaded right away. Any audio files get downloaded. So those are resources that need to start get downloaded even before the pages gets all rendered, right? And sometimes you'll see the image start to download and render slowly. So when the browser looks at this and it can't make sense out of this URL, it complains, right? This is secondary, right? It's not as important because I don't even have the image. I don't even have the image. I can't even render it. I don't care what width it is if I don't even have the image, right? So this over here, since we're not providing the SRC attribute until very later, right? At that point, they will be, I will have a value for this, right? And then I can tell you, and then I'll generate the SRC attribute. Okay. All right. So image. So instead of this image over here being loaded like this, right? We're going to instead use NGInclude, right? So we're going to use an NGInclude, and the NGInclude is right here, NGInclude, and the source is the same as before. It's inside of views, widget, templates. What is it? Widget, image, right? .view.client.html. Okay, everybody good? All right, and the same thing we would do with the YouTube, right? So let's do YouTube. So this would be widget dash YouTube dot view dot client dot HTML. right? And we can load this in here and use the NGInclude instead. So let's replace this with YouTube right here. YouTube. There we go. All right. All right. Let's refresh this. Okay, and we're still rendering just fine. Everybody good? All right. So now, actually, what about the HTML? So the HTML, what we could do is just this would be just a plain div that has this ng bind. All right. So let's grab that. Let's move it down here. Right, because we want to move that too. So there's the HTML. No, wait, where's the HTML? There it is. That's a dynamic HTML. And we want to move this over into something lower, right? So let's copy this, and we'll call this HTML. And in that HTML, where'd it go? Right here, HTML. We're going to copy this in there, right? And we're going to replace it with this NGInclude, and this is HTML. Yes? All right. All right. So if we refresh, everything's still working. Everything works fine. Everybody okay? All right. But you know, as computer scientists, we start looking at this, and we see that there are quite a few redundancies here, right? We start looking and we find a pattern. It says, wait a minute, this div looks very, very similar to this div. It's very, very similar to this div, right? They're very, very similar. What changes? What changes? Can it be parameterized, right? You know, as computer scientists, we always look for these patterns, right? Can we generalize this, right? Because one of the difficulties here is that, you know, as we grow as a company and we have folks creating all sorts of widgets, right? We're going to have to add them to this switch statement, right? Right, and we know that you know, from object orientation, you know, inheritance patterns. What we want to do is do generalizations, right? Can we create something that's very general, and then we can inherit and then put something that's specific, right? So these widgets almost are like, you know, that we want some generic widget, right? And then specific widgets could inherit from this top level widget. Yes? We're not going to go that far, but certainly we would want something like that, right? We would like to generalize a little bit. What if, instead of having this ng switch, right? Instead of having this ng switch, notice that this header is inside of widget type. See that? If we could embed, notice that if we could make this a variable, right? If this could make a variable and we could grab it from widget.widget type, right? Perhaps we could have this all collapse into a single line, right? Or maybe a few lines of code instead of having these, you know, 10, 20, 30 lines of code, right? So let's see that. Let's take a look at that, right? So what we could do, instead of having this, let's have something such as div, okay? And actually, just this could be something as simple as NGInclude, and instead of the source being declared here, we would like to calculate it. We would like to calculate it dynamically, and we're going to say, hey model, give me the widget template URL, okay, and I'll give you the widget based on the widget type, right? If I give you the widget type, return to me what the URL for the template is. See that? Notice that the source here is being treated with a quote. See that? Meaning this is a literal string. Don't interpret it, right? I am literally telling you where it is. As opposed to here, notice that I don't have a quote, right? That means that this is either a variable, which is not, right, or a function call. And in that function call, I will calculate a string and return it to you. And then you can use that string right? Presumably it'll be a URL of where you can find that, right? And then we can render it, all right? Okay, so let's do that. Let's go in the controller. So where's the controller? So in the controller, we could implement that function and say vm dot widget template URL, right? And actually, the naming actually should be get widget, right? That's a better name. It's a reader, and get, there it is, and implement it in a function down below. Function get widget, and this is widget type. Okay, and what is the URL should be? The URL should be something like this, right? That's a pattern. So var, the URL, should be that where this header over here, it's actually the variable that we just passed in, right? So let's replace this, and let's use that variable and concatenate it in there. Make sense? Right? And then we just return the URL. Right? So if we refresh, right, notice that now they're all duplicated, right? See, they're duplicated. One of them is implemented using this generic approach, whereas the other one is using the switch case. All right? So a developer who is implementing different types of widgets, the only thing that they have to deal with is to make sure that they use, there will be a convention that if anybody wants to create a new widgets type, right, that they would follow this naming convention. They all start with widget dash, right, then the type of the widget, and then .view.client.html, and they need to drop it into this templates directory. Right, and then we can create maybe like a widget market, right, where other all sorts of developers can create their own widgets, right, and we can expand the functionality of our editor, right, by being able to drag and drop all sorts of widgets, right, a widget that allows you to connect to a database and query some table, right, and then those tables are rendered maybe in a table, right, in rows where each row is a record. Right, or a repeater, right, that iterates over a data type, and you give it another template as an argument, right, and then it can use that copy paste over and over and over, right, so to render, for instance, if you look at a post in a blog, they follow a pattern, right? There's a title, there's an author, there's the date that was posted, then the actual HTML, right, and then comments, right, and they all follow this pattern. It would be nice if we could use that as a template, right? So there it is. So two approaches. I'm going to comment out one of them, but I'm going to leave it there so that you can take a look at it. And feel free to use one or another for your assignment. Okay. All right. Let's see. Everybody okay? All right. Okay, what about the editor? If we want to go into the editor, let me refresh this. Okay, we only have one. What about the editor? If we click on this right now, this cog is not going anywhere, right? So this would need to go to the editor that would edit that, right? So in this cog, we have a hyperlink that should go to. Right, should go to where? Let's see. It should go somewhere at user ID. Right? Do we have a user ID? I believe we do, don't we? There it is, user ID. Right? It's part of the model, so we can say model.userid followed by website dash. This is model.website ID. Hopefully, I believe that's what we called it. There it is, website ID, right? Followed by page and a page ID, right, which is also in the model, page ID, followed by widget, and then the specific widget that we want to edit, right? In this case, I believe is in the widget, as we're iterating over the widgets, it's inside of the widget ID, right, variable, right? So, or property, it's in the widget dot underscore ID. Yes, right? If we iterate and then we hover over these cogs, you'll notice that down below we have the correct URL, right? That will allow us to navigate to the editor of that particular URL, or that particular widget. We have the notice that all these IDs match with these IDs of the original URL that we navigated. Notice that this is widget 123. If I hover over this one, that's widget 234. See that? And this is widget 345, and so on and so forth. Right? If I click on it right now, there's nothing mapped to it. Right? There's no template mapped to the editor. Right? But this editor, remember, this editor should be different types of editors depending on the widget type. Right? Right? So again, what we could do is put all the editors in one single place, right? And then use switch case depending on the type of the widget, and then show one or another or another or another, right? Or we could do similarly. We could have them in separate editors, right? And then include them, right? Depending again on the type of the widget. Right? So let's explore the different ways, right? So this, if we navigate there, we want to go to widget editor, and so let me implement that right here. Widget, we would have widget dash editor dot view dot client dot HTML. Right. So this would be right now it would be something like h1 widget editor. Right, and then in the config, we would configure saying that if we see that URL pattern, if we see that URL pattern, we would like to navigate to. Right, if we see widget, this is a widget, widget. I don't know, widget ID. I can't use WID anymore, right? Because I already have WID, right? So I need to use another variable. So something like I forget what I said in the assignment. Widget ID, something like that. WGID. Okay, I'll go with WGID. If I see that pattern, I would like to navigate to widget edit view, and we don't have a controller just yet. So let's comment that out, right? So if I render this, it's trying to fetch it. Did I call it right? Templates, widget, edit, view, client. Did I call it right? Widget. Oh, widget editor. Okay, so let me rename that. Widget, edit. Let's see. All right, there it is. There's the widget editor, right? And so let me copy a couple of things from the list. Maybe we could copy maybe the nav bar from the top. All right, let's copy that into our editor. Let me paste that in there. Let me put also let's copy the footer as well. So this is the footer, and let's put the footer down here. Instead of this h1, we'll put it here widget editor, or something like that. Let's see. Okay, that looks a little better, right? Widget editor. Now, which widget editor is it, right? So it depends on the type. It depends on the type. So let's look at several ways that we can implement this, right? One way that we can implement it is depending on the, well, first of all, we need to know what the type of the widget is, right? To do that, we need to fetch the widget based on that ID of widget, right? We need to fetch that widget from a service, look at the type, and then depending on the type, show one or another editor, right? So let's do that. First of all, we'll need a controller, because controller that is who provides data. Right, so we'll need a controller. So let's uncomment this, and this will be widget widget edit controller. And to do that, we're going to copy one of these controllers, the list controller. Let's do that, and let's copy, and this will be the edit controller. And the edit controller, let's rename it. This will be widget edit controller, implemented in a function of the same name. We don't need the SCE. We do need the route parameter. We don't need these functions anymore. We'll parse the user ID, website ID, page ID, and also parse the widget ID now, right? So widget ID, we're going to parse it from route params. What did I call it? WGID, was it? Okay, now we have widget ID. So we would like to be able to fetch the widget using that ID, right? Widget ID. We're going to fetch the widget. There it is. We're going to fetch the widget. And we're going to send it to the model for rendering. Okay. Also remember, I'm being a little sloppy here. These should be all in an init function, right? Okay. Don't forget to follow best practices, right? Even if I'm not doing it here in the demo, remember to put things inside of their init functions, had functions declared at the bottom, event handlers at the top. Please follow these best practices. Alright, so here I want to find not all the widgets, I want to find widget by ID, okay, and I'm passing the widget ID, there it is, but this service currently doesn't have that widget implemented, so let's implement it here in the controller, in the service. Where is it? Service, somehow we lost it. It's here in the services, widget service. Let's see. We're going to declare one more API here. We're going to say this dot find widget by ID. Notice that it's slightly different the way we implement it using factory and the way we're implementing it using the service. See that? And feel free to go one way or another. Right? Perhaps do a couple using service, a couple doing factory, just so you practice both ways of doing it. What I've seen that it's a factory is become more popular way of creating services. Right? All right. So here's the widget ID. Widget ID, and this is just we're gonna iterate over the list of widgets for var w and widgets. If we find it, if the widget sub w dot underscore ID, if this matches the widget ID that we're looking for, then that is what we're going to return. We're going to return widgets sub w. Right? Otherwise, we're going to return null. And as somebody pointed out in the last class, what is wrong with that code? Sorry? Yeah, it's returning a reference, right? Instead, we want to return a copy of this, right? So we're going to return an angular.copy. Right? All right, great. So we have the service implemented. We have the controller. We need to declare the controller. Let's declare that controller in the index page. Let's load that brand new controller in the widgets, and this is the widget edit controller. If I could type today. All right. And the controller, what does the controller do? The controller fetches the widget and sends it over to the VM for rendering. And I don't believe we're rendering it all in the template. Are we rendering it? I don't believe so in the edit. Right, there it is. Let's render it right here, model.widget. Right. So let's see if we re-render that. Okay, it looks like we are. If it's 1, 2, 3, it's header. How about if this is 2, 3, 4? This is the other one, header, and this lorem ipsum. How about this one, 3, 4, 5? That's an image, right? And this is 4, 5, 6. It's the HTML, right? Right. So we would have to load different editors depending on the type. So one way to do it, we'd certainly looked at using include, right? we looked at using ng-switch, right? Let's look at yet another way that we could take a look at this. Is that we're going to do a div, and we can use ng-if. ng-if, like the name suggests, right? It's going to take a predicate and see whether that expression is true or false, right? If it's true, it's going to render whatever's in here, right? If it's false, it won't render it, okay? So we could do something like, if widget type, if widget dot, model, right? Model dot widget type, right? And if this is equal to header, then we want to render the header editor, right? Editor, right? Instead, if instead of widget type, if it's an image, then image, then this is the image editor, right? If this is a YouTube, then you want to show the YouTube editor. See that? So if we re-render this, it didn't work. Wait, what? Oh, I think that's HTML, right? There it is, the image editor, the header editor. Maybe is that's header again? That's YouTube editor, right? So notice that it's rendering one or another. If you look at the inspect through this, right? Notice that that div is the only div that is actually part of the DOM. See that? Right? All the other ones for the header, the image, is YouTube. Notice that they're commented out. Right? They are not part of the DOM. Right? As opposed to something that would look like it's working, ng-show. ng-show would accomplish almost the same thing. Right? Almost the same thing. Same thing, right? It takes as argument a predicate and checks to see if it's true or false, right? And works almost the same. Notice that we have the editor, we have the header, right? We have an editor, we have a YouTube editor, we have the image editor. Looks like it works the same way, right? But the difference is that if you look at the actual implementation, notice that only one of them is showing, but all the other ones are there in the DOM. See that? They are part of the DOM, even though I don't want them rendered, right? And the difference is that the reason they're not being displayed is that they use display none. See that? They're part of the DOM, they're just being hidden, right, and not displayed. Now, depending on how complex these DOM elements are, you might decide that, hey, this content is way too expensive, right, to load it in the DOM and then just not display it, right? Right now, it's just one single div, not a big deal. But certainly, there might be parts of the page that are very, very complex, and you might say, you know what? Don't even put it in the DOM, right? You're going to tax the browser having to parse all this HTML. Make sense? All right. All right, so in the so let's go back. ng-if is certainly a better solution for this, right? Using ng-if. All right, so for the ng-if, for the widget type, notice that if we look at the editors for these, a lot of them are the same, right? I think in the first assignment, we could take a look at. Oops, if we can take a look at in the second assignment, the wireframes for these. A lot of them are the same, right? Let's see. The editor for the let's make this a little bigger. The widget editor for the heading, for the image and the YouTube, they all have name. They all have text, right? Some of them are a little bit different. Some of them have size. Some of them have URL and different things, right? And they're certainly implementing it using different HTML, right? So let's implement it using, presumably this says that instead of using ng-if, to use what? NGInclude instead, right? So let's implement it doing that way. let's instead of using ngIf, we are going to use NGInclude, right? Let's use NGInclude, and we're going to remove all these, right? And we're going to calculate the URL based on the ID. Right? We're going to tell the controller, get editor template URL. Okay, and I'm going to pass you the widget type. Okay, notice that I am using NGInclude as an attribute. See that? Before we used it how? We used it as an element, right? And we'll see that on Monday when we talk about directives. Directives oftentimes allow you to use the directive either as an element or as an attribute, or even as a class, right? So you can bind, you can create your own elements, right, which is pretty cool. NGInclude, you can create your brand new elements, or if you want to reuse existing HTML elements, right? You can access the behaviors through attributes instead, right? The syntax is slightly different, right? If you go back to NGInclude, I thought we had NGInclude. There it is. The syntax is slightly different. If you're using it as a element, right? You then use additional attributes to provide parameters, right? If instead you are using any other element, like a div or a h1 or whatever existing HTML element, like div, like we're doing, the argument is passed in as part of the value of the NGInclude attribute. See that? And that's exactly what we're doing here. We're saying div, and then NGInclude, and then we're fetching the URL from this function over here, right? All right, so let's actually implement this. Let's go into the controller, and let's declare VM editor, right? Get the templates and implement the function down below, right? I'm going to take as arguments the type, the widget type, and the URL will be something like, let's return the URL will be something like views widget slash templates slash widget dash the type, okay, followed by dash editor dot view dot client dot HTML. How's that? Okay, so we're going to say comma, semicolon, right? So we need to create the templates, the editors, in documents that follow this pattern, right? So let's create a couple of these. Let's create here views, widget, templates, and let's create. Actually, why don't we have here a separate directory, and we'll put here editors, okay? And in there, create our HTML. Okay, but because notice that this template directory is getting crowded. You see that? Notice that these folks over here, perhaps they should all go under a dedicated directory. Call them widgets, okay, or widget templates, and the editors in a separate directory, like editors. Yeah. So let's put it under here. We'll say new HTML, and that's the temp. So let's put an editor here for the header editor, right? And for now, we'll go something like h1 header editor. Okay, let's copy this. A couple of these. This would be for image, right? And the copy them again. Paste. This will be maybe one for the YouTube. And copy them one again for the HTML, right? And each one will have a slightly different, right? This will be HTML. This will be image, and then this YouTube editor, right? All right, and the controller. I think we need to update the controller. Now the widgets are actually where? Under templates and then slash editors slash widget. Yes. All right. All right. Let's see if we broke something. I'm sure we did. Let's refresh, and it didn't quite work. Console. It can't find. Let's see. Templates. It was misspelled something. Views, widget, templates, what editor, undefined. Ooh, looks like it didn't get the value. Let's step through the controller. Let's go source. Let's go to views, widget, controllers, edit controller. Let's see, do we have the type here? Let's refresh. So it's looking for the type, and it says that it's undefined. Probably somehow we're passing it the wrong thing. Let's go back to the template, the edit template, and let's see. Probably, did we misspell this? Oh, thank you. Model.widget. I meant to do that. So if we refresh, now we have a type. There we go. So let's go. There it is, image editor, right? If we get number 1, 2, 3, we get the header. 2, 3, 4 is also header, I believe. 3, 4, 5, there it is. 4, 5, 6, there it is. Right? So they all get their different editor. Plus, each editor is going to need to have the info about the widget because it's going to need to render the form, right? So let's check to see that indeed each one of these do have them. So here, for instance, they're going to need. Do I get the widget? I hope the widget is here. All right, so let's copy these for all of these. Let's see that they all have it. Right, all of them hopefully have it. Image, YouTube. Right, so if I render, there it is. Right, so for the header, I do have the size, I have the text, I have everything. Right. If I go back, there's the HTML editor. I have the HTML. Right. I keep going back, right? There it is. That's the image editor. That's great, right? So I can now render the forms for each one of these, right? So if it's a header, then they're all going to have something similar, right? We're going to have maybe a label where it's going to have name, and it's going to have an input field. That's going to be bound to the model dot widget dot name, right? And this is going to be a form control, right? Then you're going to have maybe label. You're going to have what is it? What else do we have? Let's see what we have here. We have name, text. So this text, right? So again, we're going to have an input field for that as well. So this is going to be with the text, right? And what else? If it's a header, it will be a size, right? So the size will be label size, and this will be a drop down, right? Select that will have sizes for option, and this will be 1. Right, it'll be 6 options, right? 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, right? So if we re-render this in the editor, header editor, there we go. So we have name, text, and the size looks awful. So let's class this to be a form control, and perhaps we should put all this inside of a container, right? Instead of having the container all here, everyone having a container, we could put it outside, right, in the editor, right, in the editor templates. We could put the whole thing in a class container fluid, right? The whole div is inside of a container fluid, right? So that all the forms, right, will be inside of a container fluid. regardless of which one they have. Even the image editor is inside, right? Right, and you would do something similar for every single editor. Does that make sense? All right. I'm going to leave it here. And hopefully, I hope this helps with the implementation in the assignment. All right? Great. Thank you.